think I've told y'all this, but I have ADHD pretty bad. And you'd think after years and years I wouldn't forget this microphone and come put it on my ear, but yet when I get distracted by other things before worship, again, I find myself some here and they have to rescue me by bringing the microphone back up to me. It's good to be with you. We are closing out a series this morning that we're talking about the age to come. I could spend probably 3 or 4 more weeks. I haven't covered every passage that I could cover on this topic, but because of that, I want to do just a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning, because I don't want to have to do this housekeeping at the end. As I said when I started this series of lessons, there are a couple of passages that maybe what you might call the traditional view you grew up with about the age to come. There's a couple of passages that seem to, at least on the surface, to correlate with that, right? They almost seem like there's a contradiction. I can assure you there is not a contradiction, but it seems like almost with there's a couple of passages, 2 specifically, that we aren't going to have time to cover in this series, but I'm going to sit down on Thursday with my friend Joshua Pappas. Joshua is the preaching minister for the Laverne Church of Christ in Laverne, Tennessee. And we're going to talk about both John 14 and the second half of 1 Corinthians 15. And the second half of 1 Corinthians 15, and those 2 passages, John 14, at the beginning of John 14 and 1 Corinthians 15, are the 2 passages that many people cite to kind of say, well, not so fast about these things. And we want to try to approach those passages as well, but I'm not going to do it in a sermon form. And so if you get the chance on Thursday, probably from my personal Facebook page, if you're not friends with me, let me know, or I can send you a link, and you'll have access to that. So we're going to cover those objections on John 14 and 1 Corinthians 15. And I've said this because I think it's important that anytime we have passages that appear to be outliers, okay? In other words, we have 2 passages that when we read them in modern English today, they appear to say something different than other passages. We have to reconcile those. We have to say, how can these all fit together? It's my proposal to you that we went through something like 15 or 16 passages in this series, that we try to make the 2 fit the 16 instead of trying to make 16 fit into 2. Okay? Does that make sense? That it's going to be tough to try to make 16 verses say something different, whereas it might be, and specifically in 1 Corinthians 15, it's pretty easy to fit those back into this line of thinking, because the first half of 1 Corinthians 15, which we have covered in this series. So we didn't cover everything that we wanted to, but we are going to do some other things outside of this, and so you still have questions, say, yeah, I hear everything you're saying, but what about this passage right here? We're going to try to cover some of those most common hurdles to understanding what I would call this holistic view of eschatology, where we're trying to go through the whole Bible and see what it teaches us about the age to come. This is the proposal that we've been working from. We're going to cover 3 passages today like we've been, and at the end, we're going to spend a little time dreaming and talk a little bit about why some of this matters. My proposal to you is that God plans to renew, reinvigorate, bring to life in a whole new way, in a much better way than has ever existed before, the good heavens and earth that He created. That God is not a God of cosmic do-overs, but God is a God of cosmic restoration. We believe that in our own lives, that our own lives are bound for resurrection, that we are bound for a whole new life in Jesus. And my proposal is that the good heavens and earth that He created are as well. And we will again walk with Him in those good heavens and earth, and when He makes all things new, and He brings about the culmination of what we are on mission of the church. Our mission of the church is to bring new creation into our world. That means bringing new souls into the world, and all those things that have to do with the age to come, where we see absolute justice and peace, and we see absolute all the kindness and love that we see in the age to come. It is Jesus' church's mission to do those things that are done in heaven now to earth. And so we're on a cosmic restoration process ourselves. All right, so we're going to begin this morning, Colossians chapter 1. We're going to cover 3 verses. The first 2 I'm going to try to get through very fast. I know these lessons have been running longer than I like them to run, but I'm trying to over-explain myself, if anything, because I know these are new concepts for some people. Colossians chapter 1, beginning in verse 15. The Son is the image of the invisible God. He is the firstborn over all creation. For in the Son, in Him, in Jesus, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, both visible and invisible. I'm going to move this just a tad. Am I still on the screen back there? Okay. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All right, this is a reference to not only the things we see here on earth, but the things that are happening in the spiritual world right now. Anytime you see these rulers and powers, you need to understand that there's hierarchy and there's government happening, so to speak, in the world that is outside of this world, in what we would call the spiritual world. There's people that have certain power and certain authorities, and they have even certain rulers. And we did a study on that a couple of years ago on Wednesday nights, and it's an incredibly cool study to see how, in many ways, what happened in the spiritual realm kind of seems to mimic what we see here on earth. And so all the things, both in heaven and on earth, both the visible and the invisible, all those things have been created through and for Jesus. Okay, Jesus holds this all together. He's before all things, and in Him all things hold together. And He is the head of the body, the church. All right, we believe that there is a hierarchy in the church, and that Jesus is the head of the church. That's why no matter what any human authority says, whether inside the church or outside the church, if God gives us direct orders that contradict that, we obey God rather than man. Now we got to be careful, because we have sometimes a tendency as humans to say, I don't like that, and I'm sure God doesn't like it either, so I'm going to follow God rather than man. We need to make sure we've got clear instruction from God on something, and then we obey God rather than man. And this head of the body, Jesus, is both the beginning and He's the firstborn from among the dead. Once again, we see this concept of Jesus being the firstborn from among the dead. Jesus has set an image, and everything we learn about our resurrection, ultimately, we learn from Jesus' resurrection. Because the Bible's clear over and over. We're going to have a resurrection just like Jesus had a resurrection. And He was the firstborn from among the dead. He was the first, and He gives us an image to see what we will have for hope in the future. So that in everything He might have the supremacy. There's a reason He was first, and we will all be modeled after Him. Now, we understand this concept in the church, don't we? That we are seeking to model ourselves after Jesus. But that is not just a merely now thing, because in the age to come, we will be modeled after Jesus. He is the supreme. He's the model in which we will follow into the age to come. For God was pleased to have all of His fullness dwell in Him. Jesus becomes, you remember we've talked about these concentric circles, and we talked about in the past you had heaven and hell, and heaven and earth, not heaven and hell, heaven and earth, and we would have certain places where we would have overlap in the temple and the tabernacle. But Jesus comes to become the middle of that circle, doesn't He? He becomes this go-between between heaven and earth, that He can stand in the gap, and He can be an advocate for us to the Father, because all of the fullness of both heaven and earth dwell in Jesus. He becomes this bridge that allows heaven and earth to exist in harmony again. And through Him, notice what He says, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether they are the things on earth or things in heaven. Once again, it's this concept laid out for us, that everything will be reconciled, everything will be made right through Him, both the things that are on earth and the things that are on heaven are all going to be made right in Jesus. They're all going to be reconciled in Jesus. And it is my proposal to you that the things on earth have not been reconciled as in any point in history yet, but God will reconcile them. And that will all happen through the firstborn Jesus, who gives us an image of our hope. And he does that this way, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. The blood of Jesus is what ultimately will be the reason us sinful, physical people will be able to come into the presence of a holy God. And it will only be done because God will reconcile all things to him, whether things that are on earth or the things that are in heaven. So very quickly, if you're keeping concepts here as you on the sheet that I handed out a couple weeks ago, if you don't have that, I'll be happy to email it to you. You notice that Jesus reconciles all things on earth and all things in heaven. And that should be cause for the children of God to lift praise to him. That everything comes together in Jesus, that no matter what darkness we face on this earth, now and in this age, Jesus is going to make it all right. And we will live in a land of harmony with him. All right, quickly, Revelation chapter 5. We're going to go a little out of order. I've been trying to kind of stay in order since we started going through these three at a time. But I want to skip a little bit because I want to come back to 1 Peter today. This is in Revelation 5, okay? And I want to, I would say both these two passages are I would call support passages. I wouldn't call them the core passages of how we would come to believe this, but they reaffirm what we've already studied. 1 Peter is what I would call more of a core passage we'll get to in just a second. But in Revelation 5, they sang a new song saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe, language, and people and nation." Does that sound a little like something we've studied like 3 minutes ago, right? That in all things come together in Jesus. That sometimes reading Revelation is hard, isn't it? Anybody in here have a hard time reading Revelation? Sometimes it's hard. Some of the things are complicated. They're difficult to understand because of all the books, it's harder for us to understand the modern language and all the things that it meant in the culture that it was written in. But this seems pretty clear, that in Jesus, everything's going to come back together, and you have made them to be a kingdom and priest. You have made them to be a kingdom and priest to serve our God. So we will give service to our God, and they will, notice this, they will reign on the earth. Have we noticed that concept before? We noticed it in the very beginning in Genesis, don't we? In the garden, man is called to reign on earth with God. He lets us come into the process. That's why God created a beautiful garden, didn't he? That was perfect in all its ways. But what's interesting about the initial project of the earth is that it's very clear that the garden was a special place, and there was still land to be cultivated and land to be brought into the fold, so to speak, in the future. This is why I firmly believe that if man never sins in the garden, we're still living, and man never chooses to go his own way, right? If sin doesn't enter the picture, we're still living out the purposes of God, and we are reigning on earth with him in the good heavens and earth that he created, and we're bringing all things together to glorify and bring to him. This is that theology of work that we've talked about, that in the age to come we'll be people who work, and it'll be satisfying, it'll be fulfilling. It will not be merely a 24/7 worship service, but rather we will live life with God, and we will, as the text here in Revelation 5 says, we will reign on the earth. God will give us our inheritance, and it will be on the earth. And so, real quickly, key concept here is just simply that God's kingdom reigns on the earth. God's kingdom reigns on the earth. Revelation 5. All right, now, 2 Peter 3, I think I said 1 Peter a minute ago, I didn't mean to. 2 Peter 3 is a passage that is really important. We see this concept of the heavens and earth in Genesis. We see the concept of a new heavens and earth presented in several places through the prophets. And we see it again in Revelation. And it's easy to kind of dismiss those in our thinking, because sometimes in our thinking we say, well, that was just prophetic, and then Revelation is just apocryphal. It's about what is, these things that are written in code. So is there any plain text that talks about the new heavens and the new earth? And thankfully, there is. And it's found here in 2 Peter 3. And forewarning, if you got a piece of paper, you might have to write some of this stuff down. It's a little bit, I won't say it's not more complicated, but there's some stuff here in the original Greek that we just have to hit to get the full meaning. And therefore, I don't want you to get lost, so you'll have to kind of stay focused here for a minute. But they deliberately forgot that long ago by God's word the heavens came into being. God created everything, and the earth was formed out of water and by water. And by these waters also the world of that time was, notice what the text says, it was deluged and it was destroyed. Can y'all look at that word with me before again? Destroyed. And you might say, well, the Bible talks about, and it's going to in the next couple of verses, the Bible talks about the world being destroyed. Well, the Bible says the world has already been destroyed. And guess what? We're still here, aren't we? Now, we would believe that the earth was fundamentally changed when God chose to flood the world. But the text says that this world has already been destroyed. And it's my proposal, what we're going to see in just a minute, that God is going to destroy the earth again, so to speak. But it will not be a destruction in a sense that it will cease to exist. It will be a destruction in which God makes everything new. He renews His plan for us to live in harmony with Him. So let's keep going. By the same word, the present heavens and earth, they're reserved for fire. You notice the contrast He's making here? He's already pointing out to us, and He's going to show us again in the coming verses, that what God did to the earth by water, He's going to do it again by fire. And sometimes we think of the fire and we think of consuming the earth, that it will just poof, magically disappear. But this seems to lead us to believe that it will be in the same way the earth handled the flood, it'll handle the fire. And we believe, and I tend to believe that the earth like literally fundamentally changed in the flood, that it changed everything. And so I believe that because of the flood, we're also going to have a fire, okay? And it's being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. That the ungodly will be, notice, destructed. They will no longer exist. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. This is a warning for us as Christians, as believers, that God will come again. And when He comes again, it's going to be when we don't expect it, okay? I had an experience this week. Some of you probably read about it on Facebook, but in the middle of the night, 2:20 a.m., Friday night, I promise I thought we were being attacked by aliens, okay? Lasers were going through our bedroom, front and back, and I was so confused. And I'm creeped out. I wake up and realize that I'm alive. God hasn't come back yet, okay? I've still got aches and pains. You know, I can still pinch myself. It still hurts. You know, all those things. I'm alive. I'm awake, okay? And I went through my checkbox. You know, when you get startled and you will go through all those things, you've probably been there at some point in your life. But I was like, but there legit was just lasers going through, and the power just went off. So I thought, oh, the power line's out. So I walk outside, and there's total darkness. We live pretty much, you know, right here down the road in Homewood, and you know, there's lights everywhere. It was dark. And there's a figure coming towards me. He starts out, Marvin's right back there in the middle, about where Marvin is. And he starts walking towards me. And he looks, he's about Marvin's size. And I figure it's just a neighbor. And I say, hey, how are you? Because I figured he was doing the same thing I was, trying to figure out what in the world's going on. And he gets a little closer, and he gets to about where the communion table is, and he is just coated in blood. And he's just everything. And I thought, oh no, this is a zombie apocalypse. Like, I thought that was TV. And so like I've already thought I was abducted by aliens, and then there's zombies. But anyway, luckily he was okay. He was concussed. I believe he'd been consuming some kind of alcohol or something. They'd had a bad wreck. A couple of his friends had fled into the woods. He asked me for a ride, and I was like, nope, not happening. But the police did arrive soon after, and it totally took out a main power pole. So we were out without power for quite a while. But, you know, I experienced a thief in the night moment this week, right? I was not, when I went to bed, expecting that, right? And so it's a warning for us as Christians to remember, whenever the end comes, it's going to be like a thief. You're not going to expect it. It's not like you're going to be waiting at the edge of your bed. It's not like you're going to board a plane. It's going to come, and it's going to be like that. And it says the heavens will disappear with a roar. There's going to be this cosmic event that happens. The elements will be destroyed by fire. Once again, remember that when we see this word destroyed by fire, we take it with the context of the verses we've just looked at. It'd be easy to take that verse, that one line, and say, look, it's going to be destroyed by fire. But you got to take the verses before and after it. And the earth and everything done in it will be, and the new NIV gets this right for the very first time, and there was a hesitancy to get this right for a long time in a lot of Bibles, but more and more are getting it right. This term here, it doesn't say it's destroyed, and the Greek word there can mean this. It means to be laid bare. It's going to be refinished. It's going to be done in a way that's never been done before. Since everything will be destroyed in this way, so in this way being by the fire and by the flood, right? What kind of people ought you to be? So this matters. It matters how we live because we know that Jesus is coming back. You ought to live holy and godly lives as you look forward to the day that day of God and speed its coming. Now, we're going to get into this passage, and this is where it's going to get a little bit, we're going to have to get into some of this Greek. That day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt in the heat. But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells. Whatever it is we're looking forward to is a new heaven and a new earth. And so my first question with people when they come to me and say, I just don't believe what you believe about this. My first question is, what is the new earth? You may not believe what I believe, but if we believe just in a new heaven, the text seems to say throughout Scripture, in Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Genesis in the beginning, and then in Revelation, and now in Peter, that there will be both a new heaven and a new earth. And so I kind of lay the ball back in your court. Okay, so what's the new earth? How do we learn about it? And then, if time bears, like we're going to have this morning, quickly, we start to get into, I like to get into the Greek a little bit here, because it's important. I'm not the best Greek scholar in the world, but I trust, I have trusted Greek scholars, people that I trust with these things, and I also know how to, this is stuff you can Google, okay? It's not that far out of reach for us to understand. This phrase, a new heaven and a new earth, there are two Greek words for the word new. There's the Greek word kainos, and there's the Greek word neos, okay? Kainos, Strong's defines that as a word that means new in form or new in substance, okay? We would say this can also mean new in feeling, right? We say we wake up and I feel like a new person, right? I had that experience after Friday night. Last night I slept really good. I woke up this morning and I said, man, I feel like a new person today. Okay, well, I'm not actually a new person, but I'm refreshed and revived, right? And we use that terminology. Well, the Greek word that would say that, or you might go and get your car repaired, or maybe you have house renovations, and you say, man, it's like a new place. The Greek word you would use is the word kainos, okay? And by the way, the word that is in new heaven and new earth is the word kainos, meaning that it is new in form or new in substance. There's another word, neos, which means that it is new or just born. In other words, if you were to have somebody here who was pregnant and they had a baby, what would we say? That is a new baby boy, in the sense that it has never existed before, has it? It never existed before, and now it suddenly does exist. The idea of something existing that didn't used to exist, we understand that concept. And the Greek word that would be used to describe that would be this word, neos. So it is new in relation to time, okay? So new in relation to form or substance versus new in relation to time. But the Greek word that we see in a new heaven and a new earth is this word kainos, which means that it is new in form or new in substance. And you might say, well, how do we tell what he's meaning here? Maybe I'm just going to give you an example of something really cool. There's a real cool trick we can go to the Bible to see here in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 17. Jesus is talking, and he says they pour new wine into new wine skins, and both are preserved. All right? What's funny is he uses they pour new wine, and the word he uses here is neos. In other words, I took a grape, and the grape came off the vine, and we squeezed the grape, and we made something exist that did not used to exist before. It is new in time. And we put it into new wineskins. Wineskins doesn't have the word neos. I'm mixing Greek and English here, okay? They pour neos wine into kanos wineskins, and both are preserved. Well, why would a wineskin be new? Well, a wineskin came from an animal. It had a purpose and an existence before it was used as a wineskin. Okay? So what he's saying is, listen, we have this brand new wine that comes in from this newly purposed skin that's now a wineskin. It's had a purpose before. And it's my proposal that when Jesus uses the term here, that it really helps us define that if he wanted to use the word neos, in other words, that it was new in time. In other words, God's going to stop everything he's done before. And if you really think about it and you try to take off your blinders with me of everything you've ever learned, which is tough, right? You can't do that. But the idea, God has never just started over, right? He's always used little seeds of the age before it. Even when he gives us the new age after Noah, what does he use? He uses humanity from the old age, doesn't he? And brings it over. Now, it's a new world. The idea of God just obliterating everything and starting over, it's not really in keeping with his being and what he has shown himself to do. And if he wanted to tell us about a neos earth and a neos heaven, he could have done that. Peter knew the words. Jesus knew the words. He chooses to use the word, though, kanos. So real quickly, let's look at this. Real quickly, I just want to go over the heaven and earth thing too, by the way. Heaven has a word in that, and it's uranos, okay? That's the word used pretty much every time you see heaven in Scripture. But earth has two words too, okay? There's the cosmos. Sometimes we say, look at the cosmos. It's everything God has created. And that word cosmos just doesn't mean merely the physical earth. It means like the order of things, that God sets everything in its place and there's order in their structure. But there's also a word called gi. And gi means the physical land we stand on, okay? And let's notice what he uses here, right? So if I've lost you all together, come back with me right here. But in keeping with his promises, we are looking forward to a new, this is the word kanos, so new in form, heaven, and a new, this is the word kanos, in form, earth. And he uses the term earth, and that term earth there means physical arable land, like stuff you touch. So we're looking forward to a reformed heaven and a reformed earth, and the term earth doesn't express like a new kind of, like he literally is telling us it's going to be physical. It's going to have physical elements. He does the same thing. I wasn't going to mention this. We'll talk about it in that podcast on Thursday. But he does the same thing in 1 Corinthians 15 when he says that we will have a spiritual body. Okay? And we say, oh, a spiritual body, that must mean like a spirit, like a ghost. No, there were Greek words for ghost. He didn't use that. He says we're going to have a body, which inherently is physical, but it's also spiritual. So in other words, we're going to have a new creation. It's kind of cool, where righteousness will dwell. And so when we get into the Greek here, we notice that God had some other words he could use if he wanted to communicate with us that we're going to be in a disembodied existence in the land to come. But he goes out of his way to use terms that say, I'm going to reshape, reform, reimagine, and just dream with me of what it will be like. But it will be physical. It will have a physical element to it. And the Bible seems to be very clear, and it lays that out over multiple scriptures, that we will be in a bodied existence. And you say, well, I woke up this morning and everything in my body ached and hurt, and I don't really know if I want to deal with that in the future. Let me just reassure you, let me reset you here. It's not, it will be physical, but it will be immortal, and it will be imperishable. It can't die, it can't age. It will be just as Adam and Eve were in the garden. And life will be awesome with God, okay? Anything I said in this series that makes you think I don't think the age to come isn't incredible, I'm sorry, I must have misspoke, miscommunicated. I think it's going to be incredible. But I also realize that I don't want to die right now. And there's something that makes us want to hold on to our physical body. And I believe God put that in us because that we have a hope that is both spiritual, but is also both physical when we raise up out of the graves, in the same way Jesus did. So, real quickly from 2 Peter 3, the key concepts. The earth's second destruction is modeled by the first. We learn from the fire, we learn about the fire, and the model we have given to us about the fire is found in the flood. Secondly, the earth is going to be laid bare. This is going to be a reset of sorts. My proposal to you is it's not that we will still be on a round globe, so to speak, but God is going to reform in an amazing way. It's not like we're going to be like, man, this is not as cool as I was expecting, okay? This is going to be awesome. And it is both a new heavens and a new earth, a kainos heavens and a kainos gi, which means a physical, arable land that has been new, not in time. In other words, it's something that's existed before, but it's taken on a new form and a new method. So, J.R. Middleton, who's somebody who he has a book, but he also has a smaller PDF that he did before he wrote his book called New Heavens and New Earth. He says this about this passage. He says, here the saving activity of God is described first as laying bare or uncovering, with the earth designated as the object of this activity in verse 10. The image is of the smelting of metal, where the dross is burned off so that the pure metal may be revealed or laid bare. Then at the end of verse 13, God's saving activity is described as a renewal. And this is applied both to heaven and to earth. And that is the entire created universe, which will be characterized by righteousness. We'll be in a land that is characterized by God's righteousness. All things made right. And so you might say, what would a physical, glorified renewal look like? And this is where I want to take just a few minutes at the end of this series, and I just want you to dream with me for a few minutes. First off, I want you to know that in the age to come, justice will be served. And I don't mean that merely as the idea that the things that are of this earth will be made right. Most certainly that is the case. But no longer will people be discriminated against. No longer will the things that are of this earth matter. That speech given by Martin Luther King many years ago, I have a dream that there will be a day where people will be known for the content of their character and not the color of their skin. I love that speech. I think it is something that the church should strive towards. But I also recognize, and I'm not naive to the fact that there's only one person that can make that possible, can change every heart, and move everyone towards godliness. And it's only going to be when Jesus comes and makes all things right. So when we talk about living in a land, we're talking about living in a land of justice, where God sets right all the things that are wrong in this world. Second, it will be a land of peace. This is a sculpture, and it's a sculpture about beating swords into plowshares. It's the idea that no longer will there be need for swords. No longer will there be need for nuclear bombs or missiles. We were reminded yesterday of what happens in our world when those kind of things get into the wrong hands, as we celebrate the 20th, not celebrated, but memorialized the 20th anniversary of 9/11. No longer in the age to come do we have to worry about being harmed. No more guns, no more knives. We might have a knife, but it'll be to cut up food, not kill people or hurt people. I look forward to a world in the age to come where peace reigns and righteousness reigns. It'll be a lot like a garden. It will be beautiful images. It will be God placing us in a setting where we're in constant awe of Him. Sometimes I drive down a road and I look at buildings. And sometimes I go down roads and those buildings aren't very pretty. And I look at the land that seems to surround it and I wonder, can you imagine what this looked like before man got a hold of it? I believe the age to come will exist of a physical beauty that's unlike anything we have ever seen. No longer will there be decaying and decrepit houses, but rather we'll see God's beauty in its purity, the same way Adam and Eve saw it in the garden. Not only do I believe that we will be able to see this earth in its purity, I believe we will be able to see and maybe even explore, who knows, all of the universes that God has existed. The idea of being able to explore these things has fascinated man for years, hasn't it? The richest people in the world, the billionaires of the world, want to take ships and they want to go and find out just a little bit about those planets that are so far away. But in reality, when we think about God's existence and everything God created, those things are really, really, really close. Right? Like we think about Mars and we think, could we ever get a man there? Maybe could we get one man there? It's a pretty incredible thought, isn't it? Could you imagine what if that was just a step? Because that's just a step for God. Could you imagine being able to explore God's beautiful creation in ways we've never been able to explore them before? One of the things Jesus does, and the text is rather clear here, by the way, when He does it. One of the first things that God does, the very first things when God does, when He is resurrected from the dead, and by God I mean God the Son, He goes, and in order to show that He is not merely a spiritual ghost, He goes and He sits on the seaside with His apostles, and He eats. Remember, anything that we learn about our resurrected body, we learn it from Jesus. I believe in a land where we can have that T-bone steak sitting right there in the middle, and it won't make me gain any weight. That's kind of fun, isn't it? I believe in a land where we will have the pleasure of sitting around a table and enjoying each other's company. But not only enjoying each other's company, but enjoying living in the presence of God. I look forward to sharing meals with you in the age to come. I may never get to your house to share a meal with you in this age, but I promise in eternity we'll get around to it. We'll have plenty of time. When our kids are away at in-laws or spending the night somewhere, my wife says something real regularly when we're in the car together. And I'm almost tearing up just because it's... she says something that's just... I love it when she says it. I don't know if I've ever told her this. But she says, when our kids are away, she says, I just can't wait to get my hands on them. This pandemic has been a season where we've got some huggers in the audience, and y'all have been in pain for a couple of years now. There's just something special about touching someone and holding someone. One of the things I look forward to in the age to come is look forward to getting to hold, physically hold the loved ones that I have lost. The idea of a spiritual, disembodied spirit, where I wonder if, I always wondered when I believed what I used to believe about heaven, I wondered, how will we know each other? We're just floating around ghosts. Like, how would I know that's your ghost and I'm this ghost? And when we go to hug each other, we're just going to go right through each other, aren't we? That was what was going through my mind. But now that I believe I've come to a more biblical conclusion, I believe I'll be able to actually hold. Can you who've lost parents imagine being able to physically embrace your parents again? There's something to be said for holding the people that you love. I can't wait for the day that we can see children who were lost to their parents, and we can see them physically embrace each other. That makes me a little sad, but man, those won't be tears of sadness. And the Bible says we won't have tears, but whatever it is that we can do to express that we are just in awe, we'll be rejoicing and praising our God over it. I believe we'll be able to hold people. It was what Thomas wanted to do. He wanted to touch the hands of Jesus after he was resurrected. Only if I can touch you, I'll believe you. I just can't wait for the day that you can hold the people that you've lost again. That'll be a whole lot of fun, won't it? That'll be joy to our hearts. I see a couple people crying right now. I think it's because you can't do that right now, but you look forward to it, don't you? You look forward to the day that you can do that. And I believe there will be something that looks a whole lot like a garden. And man will walk with God again. God will be not only an idea. And I'm not saying God is an idea. We see the markers of God right now, don't we? We can see the evidence of a God. We can go out and see the night sky and say, that didn't just happen. God had to have existed. But God is still not seen. I look forward to a land and a world in which we can see and touch God. That I no longer can not only hug the humans that I love the most, I can be in the physical presence and touch the God who created me and gave me the chance of eternity with Him. I don't know about you, but these are the images and the thoughts that brought heaven to me in a way that I had never thought of heaven before. And it made me want to go there more than I've ever wanted to go there before. I'm blown away by these concepts. And I believe that it's a God who has plans for us that are just going to be incredible. At the end of 2 Peter 3, there's another verse. And it says, so then, dear friends, since you are looking forward to this, and he's just talked about that new heaven and new earth we talked about, you make every effort to be found spotless, blameless, and at peace with Him. You make it your heart's desire to want to be there, to hold that loved one, to share that meal, to explore the world together. Make every effort. Don't be caught, not prepared. N.T. Wright says this, he says, historical study, reading the New Testament in its own world, brings us surprises that can have an impact on modern Christianity. Perhaps the most important is a new, or rather very old, way of seeing the Christian mission. If the only point is to save souls from the wreck of the world so they can leave and go to heaven, why do we bother to make this world a better place? But if God is going to do for the whole creation what He did for Jesus in His resurrection to bring them back here on earth, then those who have been rescued by the gospel are called to play a part right now in the advanced renewal of the world. I can't help but think that's exactly what Peter's saying here. He's saying, because you believe in a heaven and earth restored, live your life in mission right now, trying to bring pieces of heaven to earth. Make people want to go there. Make people want to be in that age that is to come. Do everything in your power to be spotless, blameless, and at peace with God. I used to say this a lot when I was in youth ministry. I used to say this a lot. I used to use this term, and I think I may have even shared it in the last few weeks. It's been on my mind a good bit. I used to say, don't miss heaven, no matter what you do. Last thing I said to the youth group that I left, the very last thing I said, don't miss heaven. More and more every day. No matter you're totally unconvinced by everything I've spent the last 4 or 5 weeks teaching on, whatever it is that happens in the age to come, don't miss it. It's too important. It's too important. God, you're good. You give us hope when we face adversity. You give us hope when we cannot see. One day, sight will give way, and no longer will we need faith, because everything will be seen. God, we don't want to miss it. Help us to not reject you, forsake you, or leave you. Help us to dwell in your promises. Thank you for hope. Thank you for hope. In Jesus we pray, and the church together can say, Amen. Be new creation. Don't leave here without being new creation, being born again, being made new in Jesus. We've already studied the passage that talks about this, that when we become Christians, we are already new creation. It's already declared and determined you are become God's child. If you've never put on Jesus in baptism, it's too important to miss. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Or maybe you've kind of went your own way, or maybe you're struggling to see and you want to have faith, and you say, Daniel, I want to have faith, but I'm just struggling right now. God put people in these pews around you to support you and build you up. Don't leave this building without telling somebody I'm hurting. And you can let people, we give this opportunity, you can come forward, but let me just tell you, this is not the only way you can do this. Let somebody know you have a need. But if you want to let that be known in front of everybody, we'll give you this chance as we'll stand and sing together.